Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm coming to you with my favorite video to film every year. It is my Victober TBR for 2022. And I know a lot of you are like me and you have been planning for this Victober since last Victober. And so as always, this TBR is basically a massive pile of possibilities. I am not going to get to everything. Some things are higher priority than others. Some things I know for a fact I really want to get to. But as always, it's just like a massive pile of books that I most certainly will not read this month because I do the bad thing and I save all of my Victorian reading exclusively for October and I never read it throughout the rest of the year. So it winds up being that I always have a list of at least 20 books that I would really like to get to during Victober. I don't feel like my pile is 20 books thick though, which is nice. At least it's not that big, but I have several things on ebook that I think potentially make this add up to like an obscene number. But if you don't know what Victober is, it is a readathon that is run by some lovely booktubers here on YouTube. I will link to their channels and their announcement videos down below. And it is all about reading Victorian literature, Victorian classics during the month of October. And if you read one book that is a Victorian classic, you are participating in the readathon, but there are always a lot of really fun challenges that go hand in hand with it. And so I have a few books to go for the challenges. I have a few books that I just want to get to. And so let's just get into it. Let's just get into all of the books that are on my TBR this year. The first book that I am planning on getting to this year is the group read, which is The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. I feel a pretty contentious relationship with Thomas Hardy. I feel like I have loved a lot of his books, but I have also been disappointed in a lot of his books. I feel like The Mayor of Casterbridge is going to fall somewhere in the middle for me. I'm not really totally sure how I'm going to feel about this one. So I'm going into this with some trepidation. I have never hated a Thomas Hardy book. I've always at least semi-enjoyed them. So I feel like this one might have a lot of ups and downs, but I'm at least going to enjoy it. So this is one that I am apprehensive about. This is possibly the one that I am the most nervous about of the ones that are on my TBR. Roz from Scalladandling About the Books' prompt this year is to read a work of Victorian poetry. And in an ideal world, I would finally be tackling The Idylls of the King by Tennyson. That's the one that I really wanted to pick. But realistically, I knew when I looked at everything else that I had planned to put on my TBR, trying to tackle something that was really long was just not going to be the ideal. But last year I picked up this little variety, this English Victorian poetry anthology, and this covers a lot of the big names, but it also includes a lot of people that I have never heard of, so I'm kind of excited about that. And so I do also have a couple of editions of Tennyson's poetry, but I don't have anything long form like The Idylls of the King. And so maybe I'll feel frisky, maybe I'll get inspired and I'll really want to read something very long. And in that case, I do think I'm going to go for The Idylls of the King. Otherwise, I think I'm going to leave this prompt pretty open and just pick and choose a few things from this anthology. There are a lot of really good things in here, and a lot of them are included in totality. So I think, for example, Sonnets from the Portuguese by Elizabeth Barrett Browning is included in here totally. So that might be one that I decide to go for if I do want something a little bit longer, but not something as long as The Idylls of the King. I feel like that one will take a lot out of me, but that is the one that I really want to read for this prompt. But I know that I won't get to it. So it's best just to leave this prompt, I think, pretty open. I'm excited to dig into this collection because I really enjoyed reading from it last year. So that is what I have chosen to do for the poetry prompt. Marissa's prompt is to read a Victorian short story. This is the one that has me scratching my head a little bit because I don't really have any short story anthologies on hand, but one I would really like to get to is Lois the Witch by Elizabeth Gaskell. I don't know that that qualifies as a short story though. That's the thing. It seems like a lot of things that I believed were short stories are actually novellas, but that is an option for me. Another option for me is The Haunted Hotel by Wilkie Collins. And I think this really is a short story that he collaborated with Charles Dickens on, but it might also skew a bit longer. It might really be a novella. My other two options for this are definitely novellas and not short stories. So I need to really do some research on that and find some short stories. I feel like I would love a Charles Dickens short story. But one of my options for this is the Aspern Papers by Henry James, which I have started reading. And I don't know what I'm using as a bookmark. I'm using some kind of envelope as a bookmark. This is very, very short. In fact, it's under 100 pages. But this is about like a fictionalized account of somebody finding Lord Byron's papers, but it's about a fictional poet. Apparently Henry James was really fascinated by Lord Byron. It is set in Venice, and so far it's okay. It's not great. I really thought I was going to vibe with this a little bit more, but this is definitely an option here. My other option is also Henry James. I have to have at least a couple of spooky options every Victober because I love Halloween, and at about the halfway point of the month, I really want to shift and start reading horror. And so I really need to always make sure that I have a couple of options for Victorian reads that skew a little bit more, if not horror, a little bit more suspenseful. But this definitely is kind of a ghost story, and that is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. Now, this includes some other things in here. So potentially, if I read something else out of this collection, the short story prompt is covered. The Turn of the Screw apparently is pretty long. I think this also qualifies as a novella. I'm kind of having a Henry James renaissance of sorts. I feel like I've judged him pretty harshly in the past, and now I'm kind of enjoying his work. So I'm excited about this one. The sad thing is I have seen a couple of adaptations of The Turn of the Screw, and so I feel like the mystery element or the twist type element is something that I already know. So I don't know how much I'm going to enjoy this because of that, but we will see. I definitely want to try this. This is one that I wanted to put on my TBR last year and just never got around to. And so hopefully this is one that I can slam out this year. Petra's challenge is to read a Victorian classic and then watch an adaptation of it. And you're going to see a trend here, okay? I want to read a lot of Dickens. I want to read a lot of Dickens. And sadly, I want to reread a lot of Dickens. And that is sad because there are so many of his books that I have never read for the first time, but I really want to go back and reread things. But specifically for this prompt, there are two adaptations of his works that I am dying to see. One is the Douglas Booth Great Expectations that's from like 2011 or something. I think Douglas Booth is so dreamy, and he has just like the ideal Pip quality about him. I feel like he can play Pip, but I want to see that. The other that I want to see is the Dev Patel David Copperfield. I know I'm going to love that. And of the two, like, I would really love to reread Great Expectations because it's my favorite of his, and it's actually, I think, just more generally in my top 2 or 3 Victorian novels of all time. But the one that I think I'm going to go with, and I'm telling you, pride cometh before the fall. You know, this is flying a little bit too close to the sun. But the one that I want to reread and then watch the adaptation of is David Copperfield. And when you see the other books that are on my TBR, you're going to say, Jenny, are you okay? Like, mentally, are you okay? Because I've been in the biggest reading slump of my life, and I now want to read like 3 Dickens books this month. I know, I don't think we can do it, but it's nice to plan that. I think at the very least, I will try to watch this adaptation because I've heard good things about it, and I am obsessed with the cast. I'm obsessed with Dev Patel. And I really want him to be in more period dramas, so I want to support him. And I think it's going to be lighthearted and funny. I found David Copperfield very charming, but I read it over many months. About 3 years ago, I think in 2019, I started reading this a couple of months before Victober with the intent to finish it in Victober, and I just think I took too long to read it. I think I spent too much time reading it, and other Dickens books, even though they may have been very long, I read very rapidly. And so I think that meant that maybe I didn't enjoy this as much as I could have, though I listened to the absolutely amazing Richard Armitage audiobook. And I think if I reread this, I think I will listen to that again, but I'm going to make it a priority. I'm not going to let it sit around and finish it over months and months. Again, this is very ambitious. And this is the one that potentially I may or may not get to because it does feel like I shouldn't really prioritize a reread, but I feel like I need to treat myself. I feel like I need to reread Dickens. Kate Howe's prompt is to read a Victorian novel that has disability representation or chronic illness representation. The book I have chosen for this, you're going to laugh, is Nickleby by Charles Dickens. I know. I have apparently started reading this before, and I actually think I started reading it last Victober, and for some odd reason put it down because I recall that I was really enjoying it. But I think Nickleby's best friend has a disability that I've heard positive things about its representation, let's say. I feel like Charles Dickens will be fairly respectful in his depiction of disability, but that can go one of two ways because Charles Dickens was also like a social activist, and I think he showed characters with disabilities in such a way to like awaken people to problems in society at the time. And he is also very much guilty of portraying villains with disabilities, which is a pet peeve of mine, but was rampant in the Victorian period. So I'll see how this goes, but this is definitely high on my list. This is a priority for me. It was between this and The Old Curiosity Shop because I've heard some interesting things about the disability representation there. But it's another really big, chunky book by Charles Dickens. Can I do this? Can I do this and David Copperfield in the same month? I don't know. Wait till you see what else is on my TBR. I didn't bring every Dickens book that I have down here, but I could have because I really want to read him this month and I want to read like multiple different books of his. So this is only book 2, but some others will make their appearance on this TBR. The last of the main prompts is Katie from Books and Things' challenge to read a book that is a coming-of-age story or a Bildungsroman. In her announcement video, she had so many great examples of that. And she had one that was just a tad bit more obscure, but is a book that I got last Victober and I intended to get to then, but just didn't. And that is Uncle Silas by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. I am really excited about this because this is apparently a Gothic novel. It's also apparently kind of a horror type story, but it is about a young female character and it's from her perspective. I, for some odd reason, didn't clock that that's what this book was about. I didn't know it was from a first person point of view from a woman's perspective, which makes me really intrigued. So this is one that I am excited about and is one of my highest priorities this month. But I have another option here. I can, of course, cross over David Copperfield for this, or Great Expectations if I decide that I want to reread that. But here we go. What about Bleak House? I DNF'd this, and this is a book that haunts me, so that's why I think it shows up for me on a TBR quite regularly, because I have started reading this before and I DNF'd it. And it was really through no fault of the books. Like, I was just really bored in the first 200 pages, and I was buddy reading this with a colleague, and we were reading it in its serialized form. So we met once a month to read what would have been released per month in the Victorian period. And he and I really struggled with that. And I think it's the same problem that I had with David Copperfield. I read this for too long. Had I just sat down and read it straight through, I think it would have been more enjoyable. This is most certainly not getting read this month, but I like to have it as an option just in case I want to switch out some things. Maybe I'll want to go with just Bleak House this month. Maybe I want to tackle this. So you can see where I got. So I would, of course, start over from the beginning, but I feel like I could really love this if I give it the time and attention that it deserves. Again, this is just really a pile of possibilities. I just wanted to have this one in there in the ring in case I decided that I wanted to switch out a couple of other books for it. And so I feel like I'm going to love this. I feel like this also has a good Gothic vibe for the autumn, but it's a lower priority for me than Nickleby. I feel like I really want to pay attention to Nickleby, and then maybe if I'm feeling frisky, I go for another Dickens, but you never know. This is an option. This is an option, but I really don't think I'll get to it as big as it is. Next, we have some random books that I really couldn't fit into the prompts. I'm sure some of them could be. Once I get into them, I'll find out which prompt they could fall under. One of these is kind of my cheat book, and this is Against Nature, which is the book that inspired Oscar Wilde to write The Picture of Dorian Gray. I didn't realize when I ordered this that this was by a French author, so this is apparently a French book, but I'm gonna count it because it had such an influence on a really big famous Victorian novel. I really want to read this month. I don't know now if I'll get to it because looking at my big stack of TBR, I would say this one is not as high a priority as a few of the others that I've talked about, but I really do want to get to this month. And it's good to have a short one around to have an easy win. So I think I'll keep this in the ring. You may have noticed that my favorite Victorian author has not made his appearance on this TBR yet. My favorite Victorian author is Wilkie Collins, and I have decided to go through his works in publication order. I have always said that I didn't really intend to read everything that Wilkie Collins put out just because he was very prolific, and even people who were massive fans of his will tell you that he had more than a few duds, if you will. And so I've always said to myself, I don't intend to read him fully, but actually now I do. So I'm going to start at the beginning. I'm going to start with the book that he published first, which is Antonina. And this is a historical fiction book that is set during the fall of the Roman Empire in the West. And I am pumped about this. A lot of people say this is his worst book. I'm someone who loves this time period, and I'm also just someone who in general loves historical fiction. This has been a very big historical fiction year for me, so I think I'm probably set up to like this. I love Wilkie Collins, so potentially I may move on from this and move into another Wilkie Collins because I've been guilty of doing that in the past. So I will leave my options open with Wilkie Collins, but I did want to start at the beginning, and so I'm going to be reading Antonina. Speaking of historical fiction, last year, one of the prompts was to read a book that was popular, a popular Victorian book. And you could have interpreted that in many different ways, but one of the ways that I saw it interpreted was something that was popular in the Victorian period, but not necessarily popular today. And so I wrote down a bunch of recommendations from that prompt last year, and more than a few of them I would love to get to, but I decided to just focus on the few that are historical fiction because I just feel like I'm in that kind of mood. So one of these that I would really like to read is The Last Days of Pompeii by Edward Bulwer Lytton. He was a massively popular historical fiction author at the time. I have heard his stuff has not aged well. So this is one that's kind of tentatively on the TBR. I thought it might be fun. I thought it might be a little bit refreshing to read this between heavier books, but I'm going to allow myself to DNF freely. Another is a book called Old St. Paul's Cathedral, and I heard a couple of people read this last year and they really enjoyed this. And so this is about Old St. Paul's Cathedral, which burned down in the Great Fire of London of 1666. And so I think this is going to be fairly interesting. Again, I just really thought historical fiction felt like it would be a little bit lighter between reading these other heavier books. So I wanted to keep this one on the TBR. Really excited about this, really excited to try a few new to me Victorian authors this year. Last but not least, the past couple of years, I have also read a Victorian nonfiction throughout the month, which I have really enjoyed. And I tend to read Victorian nonfiction that is about the Italian Renaissance. And this year, it is absolutely no different. So this year, my nonfiction pick is by John Ruskin. I want to read The Stones of Florence, which is his kind of art criticism about frescoes in the churches of Florence, Italy, that's kind of kickstarted the Renaissance. I also have as an option from him The Stones of Venice, which is like a 1,000 page long book about art that you can see in the city of Venice. And I'm tentatively putting this here because I do like to have something on the go. I have these on my Kindle, so this is something that I can read on the go, read a chapter of here and there. And I really enjoy Victorian nonfiction. There's just something dreamy about the way that it's written that makes me appreciate what they're talking about in a different way. Like, I feel like modern scholarship and modern nonfiction just tells you the facts, and Victorian nonfiction kind of tries to make you feel something, especially when talking about art criticism and like the Italian Renaissance. There's some personality to their writing that I think is really wonderful and beautiful. But I had other options here. I want to read Thomas Carlyle's History of the French Revolution because that was one of Charles Dickens's favorite books. And I would love to read some of his favorite books. But then, I mean, literally, we would have 30 books on this TBR. And so I had to call it quits somewhere. I, again, know that I will not get to all of these. There were so many options for Dickens that I was overwhelmed. Little Dorrit, The Old Curiosity Shop, Oliver Twist, which I know I'm not going to like, so I just didn't put that on here because I didn't want to get burned out and I didn't want to read a book that I feel pretty sure I'm not going to love. My TBRs in the past have also always been fluid. Throughout the month, I add things in, I take things away. I expect that there will be no difference in that this year, but right now, these are the books that I am really pumped about, that I am really excited to read. I would love to know down below if you have already decided your Victober TBR. Let me know what you're going to be reading down below. I am so excited. But that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.